As it is 7:30, I shall make a start, and I would like to welcome you this evening. It's really fantastic that you could be here with us. I think it's going to be a really interesting evening and a lot to talk about. My name is Emily Burgoyne, for those of you who don't know me, and I am the Angus librarian at Regent's Park College here in sunny Oxford. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the Friends of the Angus in a moment. But before I do, just a little bit of housekeeping. So first of all, as Alan just said, we're being recorded this evening. So if anybody doesn't want their presence here to be recorded, you can turn your camera off so nobody can see your face in a gallery. Or now that you're here with us, you can actually change your name as well. You can change your name and your presence in the gallery. Also, just to let you know that you're currently on mute. Everybody is on mute, and that's to stop any kind of interference from any outside noise. When we come to our Q&A session, I will ask you to unmute yourself so that you can ask Paloma your question. But until then, please can you remain muted? There'll be a 5-minute break at the end of Paloma's talk, and you can go out and stretch your legs and make a cup of tea and think of a really good question to ask her when you come back. If you have a question, please can you put that down in the chat function with an idea of what you want your question to be about. And then again, at the relevant time, I'll come to you and I'll ask you to unmute. So I'm just going to say a very few words about the Friends of the Angus for anybody who's here this evening who doesn't know about us. We started a couple of years ago with the aim of highlighting our incredibly rich and diverse collections that we hold in the Angus Library and Archive. We wanted to not only highlight the diversity of everything that we have, but we also wanted to highlight the incredible research that takes place in the Angus from people like Paloma, from scholars and academics who come every day to the Angus, pretty much every week from around the world. But we also wanted to raise money for the Angus for important conservation and digitization projects that are going on. So with the incredible help and generosity of Friends of the Angus, we've managed to digitize early 18th century church records, 17th century church records of Hexham and Hampsterley, the first 3 church books of Broughton in Hampshire, Cripplegate Church Book, which is this incredible early 18th century church record of life in a London Baptist church. And we've also managed to spend money on conservation work. So we've managed recently to restore and stabilize a really fantastic collection of anti-slavery tracts sold by Martha Gurney, a radical Baptist female bookseller in the 18th and early 19th century. And this was all done because of the incredible generosity and help of the Friends of the Angus. I know it's not possible for everybody to donate money, but if you are in a position to do so and to help us, it would be hugely appreciated. Myself and my colleagues, Rebecca and Julian, we work very hard to look after the collection and to safeguard it for the scholars of today. And it would be wonderful if we could have any help to safeguard it for the scholars, the researchers, the students, academics, and the citizen historians of today and in the future. So now, without further ado, I shall introduce this evening's speaker, Paloma. Paloma Miravet Llorens is a pre-doctoral research fellow at the Department of Comparative Social History at Jaume Prima University in Castelló, Spain, which works to promote the UNESCO Chair of Slavery and Afro-Descendancy, also based in the university, and which is part of UNESCO's initiative to study and address the historical and contemporary impacts of enslavement and the slave trade. Paloma is currently developing her doctoral thesis on the Creoles of Fernando Po, now Bioko, Equatorial Guinea. And so we welcome you this evening, Paloma, with your talk, We, the Principal Inhabitants of This Town, Gender and Agency in Colonial Societies, Fernando Po, 19th Century.
Thank you very much, Emily. I will share my presentation now. Okay. First of all, I would like to thank the staff of the Angus Library and Archive for inviting me to the seminar, to the friends of the Angus for having me, and most especially Emily and Rebecca. When I visited Regent's Park College in October last year, they attended me with commendable diligence and extraordinary kindness. The research that I am about to share with you is a part of the PhD dissertation that I am currently writing about the Creoles of Fernando Po, a Black multi-ethnic group formed mainly by slaves freed on the island by the British Royal Navy and their descendants. As Fernando Po was controlled by the British military and traders for 3 decades before Spanish colonization began, the research has taken me through several archives in England. Here, I would like to highlight what, in my opinion, is the distinctive feature of missionary archives such as the Angus. The source that I could find there had a marked anthropological value. This feature is fundamental when we study remote historical periods, and we cannot count on oral source, and also when our subjects of study are groups marginalized from the official accounts. In this case, Creoles were doubly marginalized because of their ethnicity and gender. Okay, so after this brief setting, it's time to proceed with the presentation about the Creole women of the island of Fernando Po. Spain was formally granted the title of Fernando Po, currently Bioko, in Equatorial Guinea in 1778, but did not take effective control until 1858. Its purpose to convert the territory into a base for slave expeditions was frustrated by 2 reasons. Firstly, the scarcity of funds to carry it out after the wars in the late 18th and early 19th centuries. In addition, Spain signed a treaty with Great Britain for the abolition of the slave trade north of the equator, which meant that it was also banned in the island. The vacuum was exploited by Great Britain to occupy the island with the intention of transferring the Anglo-Spanish court for the repression of slave trade from Sierra Leone. An expedition of the British Royal Navy with 150 workers and settlers from Sierra Leone, as well as other points of the African western coast, established on the territory between 1827 and 1833. During this period, the military in charge founded Clarence, Santa Isabel during the Spanish colonization, present-day Malabo, and settled hundreds of Africans liberated from captured slave ships in its outskirts. The impossibility of buying the island from Spain forced the withdrawal of the troops, but it did not mean the end of the British presence. In view of the persistent disinterest of the Spanish government in colonizing the territory, its exploitation passed into the hands of British commercial companies, and after it was acquired by the Baptist Missionary Society. In 1843, the commander José Lerena established Spanish sovereignty on the island and appointed the British merchant John Beecroft as governor, who was succeeded by his partner William Linslager, in charge of the settlement until the appointment of the first Spanish governor in 1858. In addition, some of the population established in the last years, the workers and the liberated Africans, remained there, and during the following decades formed the so-called Creole group, which during the Spanish colonization continued to identify itself as British and Protestant. During the 19th century, Africans of other origins with similar backgrounds and/or cultural profiles were integrated into the group, among them some of the Bubis, the local ethnic group. The Creoles established their preeminence by acting as intermediaries between the Bubis of the interior and the European factors in the palm oil trade. They also introduced cocoa cultivation, which from the 1880s onwards resigned the first Spanish capital and became the main economic activity. Ibrahim Sundiata, Martin Lynn, and William Gervas Clarence Smith have highlighted their impact on the economy and culture of the colony. They have also pointed to their role as subaltern elite for the domination of the native population and African immigrants. However, the monographs cited above have barely incorporated a gender perspective. Studies of Creole women on the African continent are confined to the colony of Sierra Leone. Francis White and Philomena Stevie have examined the role of liberated African women established in Freetown after the abolition of the slave trade as commercial intermediaries between the European settlers and the native population. The subject has been examined for Fernando Po recently in the pioneering study of Yolanda Isela, African Women in Africa and Europe, currently only published in Spanish, that has traced the economic and social links of wealthy Creole women with the upper class in the city of Barcelona during the 20th century. The following intervention analyzes how liberated women and their descendants used assimilation into the missions that were established at the island during the 19th century, Baptist Missionary Society and Methodist Missionary Society, as a means to get protection against authorities and commercial agents and raise their demands and negotiate with colonial powers. During the British military occupation, Sierra Leonean laborers and liberated Africans were treated unequally by the authorities. The officers in charge of the settlement, Captain William Owen and Colonel Edward Nichols, oversaw the liberated Africans on the grounds that their recent experience of slavery made them unfit to join society as freemen. According to Colonel Nichols, their subjection should be extended until they learned some of the necessities of civilized life, among which he referred to appreciating the benefits of industry, which, in his opinion, would eventually make them voluntary industrious. The acculturation of women, a fundamental element for their incorporation into the labor market, was encouraged by rewarding those who showed a greater degree of submission, as can be inferred from the following report written in 1830 by Nichols. In it, he relates that the military used to inspect the state of their dwellings and that he himself rewarded the women who took the best care of them by giving them a sword. For the words used, the women invited me to supervise them, it is clear that the liberated Africans actively resorted to the assimilation of Western gender roles in order to achieve a reward that improved their living conditions. As in Sierra Leone, the authorities granted the liberated Africans plots of land for housing and subsistence farming. According to the Secretary of the Colonial Office, the grants had a threefold purpose: to economize on their maintenance, to keep them from vagrancy, and to retain them in the settlement. The words rainbow over the country were an implicit reference to the trade of the liberated Africans with the boobies of the interior, which together with subsistence farming was their livelihood and was disdained by the authorities because of the independence it provided them. Trade with the booby was also carried out by women, as evidenced by the testimonies of the missionaries on the island about their trips to the interior, in which they were accompanied by the merchant women of Clarence, who bought palm oil and eggs from the natives. After the settlement was acquired by the West African Company, its agents, who were traders of European and Sierra Leonean origin, implemented a range of measures designed to convert the liberated Africans into cheap laborers. On the one hand, they imposed high rents for land use and commercial transactions. On the other hand, they organized punitive expeditions against palm oil traders who operated independently of the company, all followed by violence with the aim of imposing discipline. The punishments consisted of prison sentence and lashes for the men, both together with forced labor. Women, on the other hand, were not considered suitable for heavy labor and therefore were banished to 3 islands in Clarence Bay: Adelaide Island, Barren Island, and Solitary Isle, which are pointed in the map. The liberated Africans reported these cases of mistreatments to the Baptist missionary John Clark, who in April 1841 denounced them to the Foreign Anti-Slavery Society. John Clark, pastor of the Jericho Baptist Church in Jamaica, had traveled to Africa in 1841 with the objective of founding a mission on the west coast of the continent. His destination was the Niger Delta, but a breakdown in his ship caused him to stop at Fernando Po, where he decided to settle. During the 1840s, the liberated African population turned to him for protection from the abuses of the West African Company, including Sally Bull, a woman who arrived on the island in 1829. Sally recounted to the missionary the death in prison of her son, Harry, after he had been detained after telling company agents that he was unable to perform his work because of a cold due to having worked for a long time in the water. In the end, neither she nor the other 37 plaintiffs received any redress from the company nor the British government. Sally and many other liberated Africans in the island joined the mission in the following years. She brought her husband to baptism, assisted to the mission Sunday school, and obtained a position of trust within the mission, as evidenced by the fact that she was chosen as housekeeper by Clark. The liberated Africans also used the missionaries as mediators for the recognition of their rights to the land that they were exploiting. The Africans claimed that an agent of the company had destroyed the title deeds that Nichols had given them, and appealing to customary law, they claimed the land they believed to be their own. However, when the mission purchased the settlement in 1843, they prevented their access to full possession on the grounds that it would hinder political stability at the island. This scenario would change in the 1840s and 1850s, when some of the liberated Africans became rich by acting as intermediaries in the palm oil trade between the Europeans and the natives, and consequently improved their status. During this period, they came together as a Creole social group around three common traits: trade as means of living, Anglo-Saxon culture, and a past related to slavery. Likewise, a certain number of natives linked to the liberated Africans through trade and integrated into the Baptist mission were assimilated into the group. This was the case of Mrs. Fraser, a booby from the village of Basupu, married to the liberated African trader James Fraser, who joined the mission during her residence in Clarence. After learning English at the Baptist Sunday School, she began to act as an interpreter between the missionaries and the booby, a key role in facilitating negotiations between the natives and the settlers, which consequently gave her social prestige in both groups. A status that led them or the members of their families to take privileged positions. For example, Mrs. Martin and other booby women who served as an interpreter with the inhabitants of Ribetete was appointed teacher of the booby students in the Baptist Sunday School, and her sister obtained an advantageous marriage with the chief of the village. With the beginning of the Spanish administration in 1858, the Creoles claimed their condition as British subjects as a form of resistance. Both governments dismissed their claim under the argument that, being a Spanish colony, they could have no other condition than subject to the authority of Spain. Instead, they received attention from British colonial power interested in winning them over to maintain some influence in the territory, such as Consul Thomas Hutchinson or the Baptist Missionary Society, a situation that the liberated Africans took advantage of to raise their demands related to freedom of worship and trade. When the first Spanish governor, Carlos Chacón, established Catholicism as the official religion, the Creole population once again used the missionaries as spokesmen to negotiate with the authorities. In May 1858, the self-styled the principal inhabitants of Clarence addressed William Blinslater, one of the British governors appointed by Spain, now Lieutenant Governor, requesting him to use the discretionary power that they attributed to his church to maintain freedom of worship. The document was accompanied by 3 sheets with 30 signatures from freed slaves or their descendants, headed by that of the missionary, at this point Alfred Shaker. Among them, 3 women, Matilda Bull, James Showers, and Elizabeth Job. In order to avoid an international, the authorities sought the loyalty of the wealthiest members of the group, with policies such as the creation of the Council of Neighbors, a local government body that free of its excluded from official positions of power, by they occupied other relevant places in the cultural sphere that allowed them to exert great influence over their community. After the expulsion of the Baptists, the cult continued despite the bans, now clandestine. Its leadership fell to a woman, Elizabeth Job, an Igbo liberated on the island during the British occupation. The religious tolerance promulgated in Spain after the Revolution of 1868 facilitated the establishment of the Methodist Missionary Society on the island in 1870. At a time of greater allowance with Protestant denominations, Creole women linked to the mission gained access to teaching-related positions. In March 1870, the missionaries opened a new Sunday school in Santa Isabel, the name given to Clarence by the Spanish, which 2 years later had 1,000 students taught by 8 teachers. The Methodist school competed with the public school for the assimilation of the population, but the scarcity of European women on the island, motivated by the stereotypes about the savage state of Africa not being appropriated for them, resulted in the teaching position being filled occasionally by African women. In January 1872, on the occasion of the appointment as teacher of Sarah Bennett, a member of the Methodist Mission, a Governor's Act stipulated that the teachers should refrain from influencing directly or indirectly the minds of their pupils in regard to the religious ideas they profess, in an implicit reference to the teaching of Protestantism. Sarah held the position on an interim basis until August of the same year, when the authorities were able to replace her with a teacher from the metropolis. In 1874, the revolutionary period ended. Well, sorry, I skipped this one, but I'm letting it a few seconds for you to see. A very interesting photograph of the girls' mission class. Okay, as I was saying, in 1874, the revolutionary period ended and began what has been called the Bourbon Restoration. With it, Catholicism was reestablished as the state religion, and a debate between the authorities of the metropolis and the colony was opened on whether it should also be extended to Fernando Po. Finally, an intermediate solution was chosen. The public worship of any religion other than Catholicism was forbidden, but its teaching was allowed as long as it was conducted by Spaniards. under the argument that the requirement of that teachers had to be Spanish was not met, the colonial government closed the Methodist mission schools. In spite of this, the adhesion to the mission of the Creole population, as well as of the migrants from the English colonies on the continent, continued, which increased tensions between the missionaries and the authorities. Its peak was reached during the mandate of Alejandro Arias Salgado, who considered that the British influence hindered the control of the Spanish authorities over the population and took measures to reverse it. Among them, he promoted the opening of 2 judicial files in order to persecute those considered religious dissidents, which concluded without convictions due to lack of evidence. In both files, his main target were the Creole women, who were called to testify more frequently than the men of the mission, who theoretically had a higher rank than them, which indicates, among other things, that the authorities recognized the active role of women in the court. The first one was opened in December 1877 on the occasion of a meeting in the Protestant church. The argument used to open the investigation was that the Methodist Church had not complied with the norm that allowed them to hold services only on the first 3 days of the week in the afternoon. In addition, there was the suspicion that children were being instructed in religion, as stated by the police officer who had discovered the meeting. At 8 o'clock in the evening, he went to the church where he identified Sarah Bennett, the woman who had been teacher at the public school, with her son and 2 other adult female persons. There was also a teacher, Robert Shower, and 15 to 20 girls of about 10 to 12 years old, among whom there were some boys, although the officer assured few. The policeman stated that the group was headed by the missionary and his wife. The only 2 men at the meeting, Reverend William Holland and the teacher Robert Shower, were called to testify and alleged that the appointment had been arranged by Mary Holland, the Reverend's wife, and its object had been to sing ecclesiastical hymns. The testimony was probably an attempt to get away with it using stereotypes about women's innocence. Unsurprisingly, the authorities, who probably were familiar with more Creole women like Elizabeth Job and Sarah Bennett, took note of it and requested women who participated to report. The summary records the statements of Sarah Bennett and 2 other females that were considered minors by the authorities: Sarah Nicole, aged 14, and Anne Berlicorn, aged 20. They were questioned about something that had not been previously asked to the missionaries, and which appears to have been the main point of the inquiry. Who had brought the children to the church? That is to say, which adults in Clarence had been complicit in the breaking of 2 bans, one about conducting meetings outside of the established days, and the other one about teaching any other religion than Catholicism. The declarants responded evasively, stating that they did not know if anyone had invited the children or for what reason they attended. The second file was opened in May of 1878 to find out what was happening in the authorized public meetings that were held on the first 3 days of the week in the Protestant church. While the previous investigation was initiated by the judge to persecute a meeting that was illegal by colonial law, this one was opened by order of Governor Arias Salgado himself, who, using his omnipotent powers, ordered it to be conducted even when there was not any indication of a crime. However, the police officer in charge of the inspection ordered the beginning of the judicial proceedings in that the meeting was being held behind closed doors, which he verified when he tried to break into the church, and without the presence of the missionary or his wife, only 7 women and 3 men. Of the 7 women attending, Anna Richard, Aga Annoby, Eliza Smith, and Jane and Sally Kennedy were identified, of whom the first 2 were called to testify. Their testimonies confirmed that what was said by the first declarant, Federico Brown, that the door was closed to prevent the air from blowing out the candles. The investigation concluded 2 days later, once it was verified that the door was closed, although not locked. In this case, the statements of Creole women were translated from English, and supposedly the declarants verified the transcriptions with the interpreter to ensure their veracity. But how could they be sure that a faithful transcription of their statements has been made if they depended on an interpreter from the colonial administration to understand the Spanish text? The added difficulty for the Creole population of needing a third party to communicate and the possibility that their interest might be harmed resulted in many Creoles learning Spanish over the following decades. In addition, their support to the Catholic cult increased, even if they did not profess it, in order to gain access to the advantages that assimilation could provide them in the eyes of Spanish authority. Since 1888, male education in the colony was entrusted to Catholic missionaries. The Order of the Immaculate Heart of Mary took charge of males and the Sisters of the Immaculate Conception of females. Nevertheless, the clandestine practice of worship continued, as well as the attempts to recover freedom of worship and teaching. However, with the advance of Spanish colonization, both the tone and the recipient of the petitions changed. In 1885, the Methodist community addressed a petition to King Alfonso XII, in which they identified themselves as the settlers of the city and subjects of the King of Spain, and appealed for freedom of worship. They also denounced the attitude of the superior father of the Catholic mission towards the Protestants, insulting and mocking their faith. It is worth to point out the differences with the petition presented in 1858 with the same goal. In the first place, the 1858 petition is addressed to Lieutenant Governor Linslager, a British authority in the colony, while the 1885 petition is addressed to the King of Spain. Secondly, in contrast to the 1858 petition signed first by a missionary, it is now the name of Elizabeth Job that leads the list. Let us remember that she was one of the pillars of the cult since the expulsion of the Baptists. Another difference that can be observed with respect to the previous petition is precisely the leading role played by women. In the previous instance, 31 people signed, of which only 3 were women, and one of them claimed to do so on behalf of her absent husband. On the other hand, now there were a total of 158 signatures, 85 from women. I do hope you can read the names in the photograph of the right. Leading the petition is Elizabeth Job. In second place is Sarah Bennett, and the following signatures are almost all from women: Cecilia, Sally, Mary, Marianne, etc. The example set by women like Elizabeth Job could serve others of later generations like Maria Smith, who in 1891 requested, together with William Berlicorn, the opening of a secular school in which she would serve as a teacher. The Council of the Philippines, an advisory body to the colonial government, authorized its opening, but the decision was reversed by the Council of State because of protest from the Catholic missionaries. In short, despite the obstacles imposed by the Spanish authorities, Creole women played a relevant role in the cultural sphere, not only within the Protestant community, but also as accidental teachers in public school. To conclude, I would like to summarize the contents of the presentation in a few ideas, which can also provide a starting point for the upcoming discussion. The freed slaves apprehended gender roles and colonial discourses to use them to their advantage, for example, by showing their homes to the British official or appealing to the power of the authorities. Allow them to improve their living and working conditions. A comparison of the petitions shows us that the banishment of the Baptists from the colony and the bans on worship imposed by the Spanish authorities since 1858 lead to women taking on a significant role in cult and education. This hypothesis opens up an interesting line of research for the future on comparing the position of women in both missions, Baptist and Methodist, and analyzing how their evolution might have enabled an improvement in their status, both within the Creole group and in colonial society in general. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Paloma. I'm sure that everybody this evening would like to show their appreciation, and thank you very much. That was a really interesting talk, and just just so interesting in terms of just the fight for religious liberty, really, and this incredible position of women in trying to be, so instrumental in this. So thank you so much. It was fantastic. If we'd like to all just go and have a break and stretch our legs for a moment, if we reconvene at 8:20, and please do be thinking of any questions to ask Paloma when you come back, about these incredible Creole women and what they were trying to do, and their courage, I think, against the authorities and Catholic authorities. Please do come back and write something in the chat function. But for now, yes, we'll go off and have a cup of tea and see you back here in about 5 minutes' time.
Okay, thank you. See you.
Right, everybody. I hope you've all managed to stretch your legs for a moment and had a cup of tea and thought of some interesting questions to ask Paloma. I think everybody is back by now. So I'm just going to start, actually, Paloma, by asking you just actually a question about what happened to these women, what happened to Sarah, and what happened to the other women who were seen as transgressing these rules that were placed upon them by the authorities. Did you come across any records of what happened to them? Did they go on trying to kind of teach or practice their religion clandestinely, or did you find out much more about them?
Okay, thank you for your question, Emily. The practicing of cult, the clandestine practice of cult didn't stop until the 1920s. That was legal to teach Protestant religion in the island, but it could only be done by Spaniards and in Spanish. But it is not until the 1920s that teaching Protestant religion is legal.
Okay. And do you know what happened to the specific women? Do you know if were they punished? What happened to them?
I would like to know it, but I don't. I haven't found any records about their future after that judicial file was opened.
These are incredibly courageous. Okay, so first question from Rebecca. Rebecca, if you'd like to unmute yourself and ask Paloma your question.
Oh, yeah. Hi, Paloma. Thank you. That was such an incredible paper. Yeah, it was a really amazing narrative to hear. And it was so interesting seeing all the different kind of social, political elements that went into kind of what could happen if kind of people of the Fernando Po were kind of engaging with missions, sort of with, kind of like education in English or like kind of better social stability. But I was really interested that they were kind of in a way able to use kind of a connection with the Baptist Missionary Society as a kind of way of like appealing social injustice issues that were happening to them. And it's because, as you might know, in Jamaica, the Baptist Missionary Society, which Clark was obviously involved in Jamaica, they had a very difficult relationship with the British government, who was seeing their presence there as a kind of disruptive and anti-authoritarian, bringing kind of education to the enslaved population of Jamaica. So I was very interested that the BMS is then acting on behalf of, the people of Fernando Po, appealing to authorities. So I was wondering if you knew much about the relationship between the BMS and the kind of the various forms of government on Fernando Po. Kind of, were they seen positively, or was there still kind of quite difficult interactions between the two?
Thank you, Rebecca. You you have commented a very interesting thing because the missionaries, the Baptist missionaries who went to Fernando Po, they were originally missionaries in Jamaica, and in 1841 the Jamaican mission became a separate unit of the BMS, as you will surely know, and that trait of their missionary action of being somewhat contrary to authorities and being the voice of the slaves or the liberated Africans, they also take it to Fernando Po, and that's why the Spanish government tries to expel them in more than one occasion. Finally, expelling them in 1858, but they also try it in the 1840s. Why? Because their presence is very uncomfortable for them. It not only defies their authority because they are not Catholics, but also because they give voice to a sector of the population that they only want to be that cheap laborers and submissive to authorities.
Yeah, oh, thank you. Yes, that's so interesting. And yeah, and the fact that they kept staying there and kept trying to, kind of be a voice for people, even though the Spanish authorities were trying to expel them. No, it's so interesting. Thank you.
Thank you.
And the next question from John Main. Would you like to unmute and ask your question, John?
Thank you, Paloma, for a very interesting talk. This is a slightly related question. I'm just wondering, when the community tried to claim to be British citizens, what was the actual reaction of the British authorities? Did they reject that claim, or did they, or were they not aware of it, or what was actually happening?
Excuse me, John, but in the precise moment you asked your question, there was a cut for me.
I'm so sorry.
Could you repeat it, please?
Yes, of course. At one point, I think it was 1858, the community attempted to claim to be British citizens. Mm-hmm. And I was just wondering, was there any response from the British authorities, the Foreign Office, to that claim, or did the claim actually reach them, or can you say what happened?
Yeah, sure. Well, they were claiming their British nationality based in the fact that they were liberated by British men of war in the island in the 1820s and 1830s. What was the problem here? That when they were liberated in the island was not a British territory. It was a Spanish territory. So that's the reason why when they claimed to be British subject in 1858, British and Spanish authorities answered them, you are not British subject because this territory was never a British colony. British occupation was illegal. Was tolerated by Spain, yes, but was illegal.
So there was no acknowledgement by the British that they were British citizens?
No.
None at all?
Some British authorities, such as the Consul Thomas Hutchinson, mm-hmm. supported their claim.
Right.
But it never get anywhere.
Okay. Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Paloma, am I right in thinking that Seika tried to kind of turn it into a British colony as well, that he had ideas that it was going to be a colony and a deep water harbor and all sorts of things in I think in Clarence, am I right? Or I'm not sure.
Yes, in fact, the British government tried to buy the island in two separate occasions. One of them while they were occupying it in the 1820s, at the end of that decade, because the negotiations with the Spanish authorities were not successful. The British troops abandoned the island. But the British government tried to buy the island again at the end of the decade of the next decade in the 1830s. Not successfully.
Okay. Oh dear. Okay, thanks so much. Okay, so Karen, would you like to unmute and ask Paloma your question?
Yes, thank you so much for that paper. That was very, very interesting. And I have lots and lots of questions, but I'll try to keep it to one, or maybe one extended one. I was fascinated by your analysis on cultural assimilation as a strategy, the inspection of the gardens, but also we're keeping the door closed so that the candles won't blow out, and finding ways of that would have been logical in that, to other people. I and the women being such strong leaders, I have an idea that they had seen missionary women who were very strong leaders and who led small groups, and that maybe this was this was part of the way they learned something of that kind of strategy. But what I wondered was, and you may not be able to answer this, but in terms of their worship, eventually when they gained freedom and so on, was it still following patterns that had been learned from the Baptist or Methodist or whatever, or was it more like the Creole people? Was it using traditions and customs and things from their own heritage?
Thank you for your very interesting question, Karen. And I'm not able to fully answer to it, but I will try to partially answer to it based in what I currently know about it. There are no many details in the archives about liturgy in neither of the missions, nor Baptist nor Methodist, but with Methodist, native missionaries are introduced.
Right.
And that makes that really makes the difference, because with Baptist, there are black missionaries, but they are from Jamaican origin.
Right.
With Methodist, black missionaries are from Fernando Po, are natives of the island.
Ah, right. Okay. That would make a tremendous difference. In terms of, but still that sort of, so in that culture originally, were women, strong women, and would have taken more of a voice in that culture, or was that something that was learned? Do you see what I'm saying? Was it something that was assimilated? If these were missionaries from the indigenous group, or from who were from the island already, women who were native to the island, and they were the ones who were teaching and were the missionaries and so on. Had they assimilated their teaching styles and what they were teaching, was it all from the missionaries originally? Do you see what I'm saying? Was it, or was there anything that was related to the indigenous group?
Sadly, the documents in the archive lack particulars about that.
Yeah.
It would be very interesting.
Yeah, it'd be very interesting
to analyze those things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One more question. I'm sorry, I'm dominating, but one more question. When the Baptists left, because you said the Baptists left and the Methodists came in, so did they just adopt Methodism then? And then there was no longer a Baptist. It didn't really matter to them that they were Baptist? I mean, Baptist and Methodist are very different in terms of church polity and theology and all of that. I mean, completely different. So did they just, in other words, this is back to assimilation. Was it just that they had kind of gone along with the Baptist, and then the Methodists came in, they went along with the Methodists, and then do you see what I'm saying? And that it was more about freedom of voice and freedom to do what they wanted to do. And
I have
church polity and ecclesiology didn't matter to them, or what?
I have an hypothesis about that. That is that they joined to missions because missions helped them to archive group identity. They formed a group identity around the missions. They were less worried about doctrine. In fact, there was Elizabeth Job, the one who received the Methodist missionaries when they came to the island in 1870. The same women that had a main place in the Baptist mission was the one that received the Methodists when they arrived. So I think for them it was more about that group identity, about having European representatives to pose their demands to other European colonial powers, such as the government authorities, the British firms on the island. There were many British trading firms in the island in the second half of the 19th century, also in the first 2 decades of the 20th century.
So in terms of identity, it wasn't what I'm hearing you say is that it wasn't really about religious belief in that sense. It was about having a place and a group that they identified with, and that perhaps it was more about freedom of voice, being able to meet freely and it happened to be in a church. Is that what you're saying? It happened to be a religious group, or what was it? So it wasn't about the particular theological views, or is that difficult to say?
I think they had their religious beliefs, but were not that worried about particulars in doctrine, and more worried about having, as you say, a place to meet, a place to learn the ways of the society they were living in, because in the Sunday schools they learned to read and write, and that was really important for them to survive in a colonial society.
Yeah. Thank you.
To improve their living.
I could talk to you all night. Thank you very much. It really was an excellent presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. Very interesting questions, really.
Okay, thanks, Paloma. So another question from Brian Talbot. Brian, hello. Would you like to unmute and ask Paloma your question?
Hello, thank you so much for your interesting presentation, which I enjoyed. Just following on from what Karen was discussing and asking you about with you, is there any evidence of the Baptists and Methodists helping each other? Or the people, you've already said that the people who were in the Baptist mission, who were local, all then went to become Methodist. But is there any evidence of the bodies, the denominations, helping each other in the face of the religious persecution? Or is that just not something that happened?
Thank you for your question, Brian. It really was take in mind that from 1858 to 1870, there are 12 years, and people who was Baptist before the date of the expulsion, some of them were immigrated, were gone off the island when Methodists come, and the ones who remain, they really didn't have another option. They were quite isolated, and also Spanish authorities were trying to impose Catholicism and Spanish language on them. So I'm telling you the same that I told Karen. My hypothesis for this is that they were looking more than for a determinate theological doctrine, a group to belong, to protect their interest, to have a social and cultural scenario apart from that one that the Spanish authorities tried to impose on them. Thank you.
Thank you.
Still muted. Thanks, Brian. Thanks, Paloma. And lastly, I think a question from David Boydell. David, would you like to unmute and ask Paloma your question?
Yes, thank you very much. You've opened up new horizons for me about Fernando Po in the 19th century. I have a question about today. I know that in recent years, there have been Spanish missionaries working in Fernando Po as well as elsewhere in Equatorial Guinea. Do you have any link with them? And is their work at all linked with what happened in the 19th century? Or is it a totally new work?
Thank you very much for your question. And I think you have just opened a new line of thought for me, because I don't know anything about that mission, which is currently working there. Are they Methodist?
No, the Baptist with the what used to be called the European Baptist Mission, but sent by the Spanish Baptist Union. They're in Malebo, I believe, and also on the mainland of Equatorial Guinea. Bata, am I right? On the mainland, but also in Fernando Po. Yeah. They do educational work mainly and some evangelism. Okay, thank you. So you can't help me about that.
Thank you. I will look for it. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
So thank you again so much, Paloma. That was really interesting. I think that I echo what David said. I think that this has kind of opened out a whole new area, I think, for a lot of us here this evening. I mean, I know, about Fernando Po, and I know about really the male missionaries who were there, the Seika and Innis and Joseph Jackson Fuller, all very, very interesting people who were there in the 19th century. But I did not know about the incredible role that the Creole women played in trying to go on teaching and meeting in Baptist churches and I'm really struck by that contrast between the two petitions that you showed. The one that I think was in the 1840s, it was the white missionary man who was heading it. And then in the 1880s, it's the Creole women who, 85 names. So this has been really, really interesting. And I think it's been very, very enlightening, and about a time and a place in history that I did not know about. So thank you very, very much. And I think if everybody here would like to just show their appreciation once more of Paloma with her talk. Yeah. Thank you so much, Paloma. Thank you again. And thank you everybody here as well for joining us this evening. We'll be back in the autumn with more Friends of the Angus seminars. But for now, good night to you. And thank you again, Paloma. Thank you.
Thank you very much.